Welcome back to Witch Church. It's Mal, and I am thrilled that my friend Mandi Rae is back on the podcast joining us today. We just looked back into the history of Witch Church, and Mandi Rae has been on 2 episodes of Witch Church. We've been lucky to have her on episode 76 and 98. But now we're well into the 200s. So it's been about 100 episodes since you've been on, so it's time to come back. So thanks
That's
so
right.
much for joining us again.
Yay, I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Yay. And I'm sure we said this like long ago, but Mandi Rae was like one of my very first like astrology friends, my like kind of those online astrology friends who then become like really great people. And I'm happy that we've been on our journey together from baby astrologer to professional astrologer.
I totally agree. You've been a wonderful buddy to have.
Yes, yes. And we both are essentially, we're chart twins in a lot of ways. Mandi, what is your big three?
Cancer rising, Scorpio sun, and Pisces moon.
Yes, okay. And as the audience knows, I'm Cancer rising, Pisces sun, Pisces moon. So we're both triple water. And then we both have Jupiter in Sagittarius. So we're same Jupiter cycle. And because we were born 12 years apart, we're always in the same perfection year too. So I swear, whenever something is going on and I text you, we have very like uncanny transit similarities.
Best friends with the same moons, all kinds of things that we have in common.
Totally, totally. But Mandi, tell us a little bit about where you're at now, because you were with us about 100 episodes ago, but give us your little update about what you've been feeling and what you've been doing as a professional astrologer and where your practice is going.
So, my business name is Ecstatic Astrology, and I actually took a little bit of a break. I mean, I think a lot of Cancer risings can commiserate with that. I had some health stuff going. So, I looked back in my last YouTube episode was probably about 8 months ago, and I'm kind of getting the wheels turning again, being on some friends' podcasts. And I think we're doing a workshop on the eclipses coming up, so that'll be on my Instagram and everything. You can find me on Ecstatic Astrology everywhere. But yeah, that, and I'm doing lots of social media work for OPA, the Organization for Professional Astrology, and just kind of taking it step by step. I still have maintained my client work, though. That's the thing that's kept going. But YouTube, got to get it started again. That's where I'm at.
Oh my gosh, I'm in the same place. And I was just telling you before we press record that the Mars retrograde in Cancer has been rough on us Cancer risings, body wise and just exhaustion. So I think this is a good metaphor. We're recording this on Monday, February 24th, which is the day Mars is finally direct. So it's a good metaphor for us Cancer rising specifically to
So happy.
hopefully gain our energy back.
It's all happening.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad that you've joined us on the Big Three, which is my new kind of series. And it's essentially like, what are the big three transits of the month ahead, plus the lunations? And what's interesting about March 2025 is we have a full lunar eclipse and then a partial solar eclipse, I believe. I might have got them mixed up, but
You're right.
we'll get them right when we actually talk about them. But we're starting eclipse season. And then we have an outer planet ingress, Neptune into Aries. And then we have both Venus and Mercury retrograde. So we'll be covering all of that today, but it seems like a pretty jam-packed month.
It is. I've been looking at this month for years.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, astrologers tend to do that.
Been living in it. I was living in 2025 back in 2023, I think. So
Yes, yes. And I just realized too, I feel like Mars just went direct yesterday. And to start off the month with our first transit on March 1st, we have Venus stationing retrograde in Aries. I'll pop a picture up since if you're on YouTube, I'll show you the chart. And then we have Mercury entering the retrograde shadow on March 1st. So we have about this last week of February to enjoy 1 week of nothing in retrograde, really. But so much in the shadow still, right? But then our month does kick off with those two retrogrades. How do you feel about Venus in Aries in general? What are some things that you think of, Mandy?
Well, I think I need to get my taxes done before March 1st. I know that. But beyond that, I think Venus retrograde in Aries, or Venus in Aries in general, is, well, it's an interesting concept because is it detriment or fall in Aries? One of the two.
It's detriment.
Detriment, because it's
Yeah.
opposite Libra. So to me, whenever you see Venus in Aries, it becomes less about other people and more about you. And I think that's healthy. People talk about it as, like, oh man, it's debilitated, it's not going to do well. And I think you have to check on each area of life no matter what. And that's what this Venus retrograde does. It's like, are you doing what you need to do for yourself? Are your relationships in alignment? And we need to pay attention to ourselves. Mars retrograde in Cancer that we just came out of is about our emotional security. Venus retrograde in Aries is like, hey, we checked on that. Now let's check on how we move through the world as an individual.
Totally. And, even though it's the first of the month, Venus has been in her shadow for a little bit during the end of February. And so, with my astrologer eyes, I've kind of been listening in to, people I know and like what people are saying about their relationships. And a couple that I know was telling me about how they are opening their relationship in order to explore like some of their own individual desires and values. And they're committed to staying together as a unit, but then they're opening up for this purpose of individual exploration. And I thought, like, oh my God, that is Venus in Aries and going into retrograde. It's not to say all of us in a partnership will literally open our partnership, but there is something about continuing to explore yourself and your desires, even if you are in a partnership. I think sometimes we get really bogged down by, maybe the responsibility of having to factor someone in. And I think Venus and Aries checks us a little bit and says, are you abandoning yourself though? Or like, are you really in alignment with yourself? Or are you just doing this because it's easy, because your partner, desires to go this direction, that kind of thing could
Mm.
come.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's square to Mars by sign, not by degree. There is no exact square, but to have Venus and Mars in these two signs that are square, while Venus goes retrograde on March 1st, I think speaks to a lot of, I mean, obviously it's redoing, reevaluating, but also in regards to your almost like your root center. It's like, how do you feel about the world in general and who you are in it? And do you feel safe? And do you feel autonomous? Are you being authentic? Do you feel good enough in yourself to be authentic? So yeah, there is a lot of self-referential things going on here. I don't call it selfish. I mean, you can be self-referential and look at yourself without being selfish, although I'm not saying that Venus retrograde in Aries will not have that effect on people. It's something probably to look out for, but that's exactly the kind of thing you will notice more with Venus retrograde in Aries. Am I getting what I need, especially with Mars in Cancer?
Yes, yes. I'm so glad you mentioned that. And Venus and Mars are both our relationship planets in a lot of ways. And Venus in Aries answers to Mars. And where is Mars? As you said, he's hanging out in Cancer, he's clearing his retrograde shadow. And Mars is in fall in Cancer. So we have Venus in detriment answering to a Mars in fall.
Mhm.
So it almost kind of feels like the relationship planets are both a little bit down for the count, but are able to maybe find some solace in both of each other being down for the count. You know, when
Mhm.
you're sick and your partner's having like a rough time at work and you almost feel um like more assured in the partnership that like you're like, oh my god, I've been not feeling well, and then my partner has this work thing going on, they're all stressed out, but at the end of the day, like, I know we're still choosing each other, and even though we haven't made time for date night in like a month, like, I know we're still going. You know, that's kind of what this Venus Mars combination reminds me of. And hopefully by May, that's when both planets, well, Mars will definitely clear its shadow. I think Venus will be out of its shadow by beginning of May as well. I think by beginning of May, there's a little bit of a rebirth for our partnerships after a bit of a trying time.
Oh, for sure. And I looked back at the last one, and this is something to note if you're following, the patterns in your life is Venus went retrograde in Aries March through April of 2017. And, the differences in where all the planets are, they do make a difference, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Venus retrograde in 2017 had Mars in Aries during that time. And that was a rough one for me personally. So I was looking at it like, oh man, this is going to be the same thing, oh no. But then I realized, with Mars in Cancer this time, I think it's a lot more sensitive rather than fiery and maybe stubborn because Mars did go into Taurus during the Venus retrograde last time. So it moved from this cardinal sign to this fixed sign. We have Mars in watery Cancer the whole time with this Venus retrograde. So, maybe it's a little more workable, a little more I guess sensitive is probably the best way to describe it. It's learning more about yourself rather than charging ahead and being stubborn or having this kind of butting heads situation. I think it's more like, hey, that hurt my feelings and that's important to me. It's less of a fiery Venus retrograde in Aries and more of a let's check out all of the areas we may not pay attention to, especially the ones we stuff down. So, I mean, I think it's more of a discovery Venus retrograde than a one that's apt to just break things.
That's such a good point. And wait, now I'm thinking about my own Venus retrograde in 2017. Do you remember, was that more like first quarter, second quarter of 2017?
Yeah, it was first. It was March, April,
March,
similarly.
April.
It's stationed retrograde March 4th of 2017, and it went direct April 15th.
That's fascinating.
Mhm.
I have a memory of that time period. I'll tell you about it later, but that we won't go into it. But that is really fascinating to me. And it does kind of relate in a weird way to some of the things that are going on now. So that's pretty freaky.
Yeah,
Um,
I started my astrology practice in September of that year. And,
mhm.
I look back and I'm like trying to restart, not that I've quit, but just looking at those themes, even the simple ones. I mean, I even have some in my relationship that's actually kind of why I was like, is this going to be the same? No, it's not. In fact, the nodes are also, they were in the same signs. The north node was in Virgo, the south node was in Pisces, but flipped because now we have the north node in Pisces, the south node in Virgo.
Oh,
So, I mean, if you think about it that way too, enough differences to make this a very different experience.
totally. Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes. One more thing I'll mention too, we're talking more about our individual experience with Venus retrograde. Collectively, I always think about how, like, in mundane astrology, Venus represents groups of women, and Venus in Aries being a Venus in detriment. I'm thinking about I just would not be surprised to see protests. I wouldn't be surprised to see women's issues coming up in the news. We've already seen topics of gender and gender discrimination, I guess we could say, going throughout this whole year. But I wouldn't be shocked to see something about that amping up. Although Venus is a warrior, we often forget that. Something I tell my students is the actual surface of planet Venus is volatile. It is
Mhm.
a surface of poisonous volcanoes exploding. So you don't want to piss Venus off. And Venus is a little bit more agitated right now. So when it comes to fighting back and fighting for what we feel is aligned with our values, I think this could potentially be a collective experience of coming together with some sort of anger related shared grievance.
And it happened last time. March 8th, 2017 was a day without a woman. So it was organized, I think, for International Women's Day appropriately. And I think a lot of, well, it encouraged women to take the day off, I think, from jobs. And a lot of women wore red in solidarity, Venus and Aries, So I think it's highly likely, especially with the political climate. And that's when there were ongoing debates about I guess the women's rights with her body. Let me put it that way. So reproductive rights, I think, is a good way to say that. There were debates happening then, and we all know what happened after that. So the Supreme Court struck down a law that had been on the books for years. I never thought that it would go away. You grow up thinking that. So likely we will see some stuff like that this time.
Totally, totally. So interesting top of the month transit. Definitely pay attention to your Aries house as well in your natal chart. What's going on there? You'll see throughout this month ahead forecast. Mandy and I are talking a lot about Aries transits, although maybe something to pencil into your calendar is March 27th. That's when Venus will revisit Pisces. So this Venus retrograde is not entirely in Aries. A snippet of it will be in Pisces. So it's really our Aries and our Pisces house, especially with the North Node now being in Pisces. Like, those two houses are really closely involved with something right now.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, you can kind of celebrate when Venus moves back into Pisces. It's exalted there, and it's almost like trying so hard to get back there.
Totally. Venus is like so much more comfortable in Pisces next to Neptune. And so hopefully once Venus goes back into Pisces, maybe some things will cool down, and maybe some of the fights we fought during the first half of Venus retrograde in Aries will end up with a peace offering or something along those lines.
Oh yeah. I mean, especially I think with it being 40 days, there's so many mythological and religious stories that match the descent of Venus. The descent of Inanna is one of them. And you can look these up if you're listening or watching on YouTube. But also Jesus in the desert, 40 days, 40 nights without bread, and he was tempted. And so there is the nature of Venus being so bright in the sky and so beautiful, and then it goes away. And if you're an ancient person, to have that disappear, it probably does have you reevaluating things like, where did that beautiful bright light go? And then to change from a morning star to an evening star. And it will, after the Cazimi change into an evening star, I believe,
Yes.
or morning. I'll have to
I
check that
think
out.
I think morning, but maybe I'm wrong. We can
Morning. No, I think you're
It's
right.
morning.
It
Yeah.
has been an evening star. And Venus as a morning star is much more angry. So that is something to note. It is like, the warrior goddess, even more so. So the reevaluation here, I think if you can work with it, that is the most beautiful part of astrology, is to say, okay, reevaluate. What am I reevaluating? Find where Aries is in your chart and be active in it.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I love that, Mandy. And maybe that takes us in to middle of March, where we actually have our first eclipse of the year. March 14th, we have a total lunar
Yes.
eclipse in Virgo, and that'll be happening at 23 degrees Virgo. And I'm really interested in this eclipse. It almost opens this story now that the nodes are in Pisces and Virgo. And, it's like, all right, what's this first eclipse gonna open up here? Yeah, how are you feeling about this one?
Pretty good. I think it's one of those things that when you look at what Virgo means, which is perfection, and I'm not saying all Virgos are, perfectionists or anything, but there is this perfection and attention to detail and service oriented, just so many things with Virgo that feel sometimes kind of difficult, anxiety. And so with the South Node there, it's about embracing the imperfection, and I am looking forward to that because I I love to embrace imperfection, and to kind of let go of the details all the time. And of course, you can't let go of planning your life or doing the Virgo part of your chart, but you can separate yourself from the over analysis of it, and from the maybe even being a doormat. Sometimes Virgo placements, or just wherever you have Virgo in your chart, you can tend to make yourself, I guess, lower than maybe you should, or just kind of get walked on sometimes, give too much. It's about healing, being the healer. So a lot of times we'll overdo that with Virgo. And so I look forward to redoing that, redoing habits. Virgo is the habits area. So as far as that goes, I'm definitely looking forward to it. It'll be trine Uranus. Uranus is change and innovation. So there is, I think South Node gets, well, there are a lot of things in astrology that get a bad rap that are always bad or scary, and the South Node is one of them. And the South Node carries so much of the talents that you have, and so much of the place that you come from, the things that you know well. And when you get a chance to redo that or get reminded of something that maybe you haven't been doing or used to be passionate about or used to pay attention to, and you get reminded with the South Node there. So I do look forward to that.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, how, Virgo, like you said, Virgo is the sign that teaches us how to be of service and how to use our gifts and talents for the good of the world. And, there's this really beautiful high frequency side of that. And then there's the sort of shadow side, which is more of the martyr archetype, or just getting stuck in the cycle of even our humility, almost downplaying what we're actually doing, you know? Uh,
Hmm.
so maybe there's something, especially around the eclipse. Virgo is ruled by Mercury. And I look at what is Mercury doing on the eclipse? Well, Mercury just had a important conversation with Venus because Mercury's in Aries and he's right next to Venus retrograde in Aries. So it kind of feels to me like, in a weird way, I think, what did Mercury and Venus just talk about? And they maybe just said something like, remember who you are, or don't forget about, your identity, or don't let where you've messed up, or the mistakes that you've made, don't let that weigh you down, and just keep going and release that, and just give yourself the permission to move forward anyway. Just like you said,
Mhm.
don't get bogged down in trying to be perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the next day after the eclipse, Mercury stations retrograde. It's almost exactly 24 hours after. So yeah, it is like you know, it's time to turn things around. But I agree with that. I think with Virgo, you can I think just be like too over analytical, or almost that's where you don't have trust. Pisces is where you have trust. Virgo's like, I don't know. Let me go read about it first. I don't know if I want to make that decision. And so there is a sense that you're trying to let go of that, of the nature of control. I mean, and people don't tend to think of Virgo as a controlling type sign, but I think there is a certain type of control people try to have over data, over your mind, over your space, over your body with Virgo. And so, kind of letting go a little bit, and then Mercury turning around and being like, yeah, let me go rethink this for a minute, is appropriate.
Yes, yes. And even one of my favorite things to think about with Virgo too is the mind gut connection, because in medical astrology, Virgo rules over like the intestines and the gut. And one time I had a yoga teacher tell the class, your mind is in your gut and your gut is in your mind. So, when you're super nervous and you're overthinking things and then you get a stomach ache, like that is the mind body connection. So, if your body's telling you something around this eclipse too, make sure to listen to it, because your body might carry some really important information about where you might be trying to control too much. Just like you said, there's not enough trust, there's too much control. And yeah, if you've got a stomach ache or digestion issues around this eclipse, like it could be that mind body connection trying to tell you something.
Yeah, and it is the perfect eclipse to try to stop bad habits. And that's not to say to get too over analytical about it, because you don't really want to do that. But it is a perfect time to be like, let me maybe change up the way I do things on a daily basis, because Virgo is about the way we kind of live our lives and health and habits and things like that. And with it trying to Uranus at the time, and Mercury going retrograde the day after, I feel like it's the perfect time if you were to say, want to try a diet, like, okay, raw food diet, let's do this. That would be a perfect time to do it. If you want to reintroduce sugar, I mean, it's just any change that you want to make, this would be a good time to do it, I think. Maybe not right at the eclipse. It's probably never a good idea to do it on the day of, but maybe the next day with the Mercury retrograde. And that being said, I think that is one of the things that you can do, is how to do it in a healthy, not being hard on yourself way, you know.
And I'm glad you reminded us of that too, that so many times we think astrology is going to all come piling down on one day. But with the eclipse cycles, this isn't just a March 14th thing. Like, this is going to be the next 18 months with the nodes in Pisces and Virgo. So, whatever story is opening for you this March, there is a long continuation, and there's a lot of room to pivot and work on whatever those habits you are trying to build.
hmm And something else that I think about that day, we're talking about March 14th, the eclipse, is that day the sun has just passed Saturn. And what better time to kind of take a breath and relax, and maybe, take care of yourself and be easy on yourself than the day after the sun conjoins Saturn, because that's a whole process of working and mastery and trying to get past obstacles. And the sun conjoins Saturn, passes it, and then there's the south node Virgo eclipse that's like, hey, Why don't you let go for a minute and take a break, you know?
Oh yeah, believe me, I was born on a Sun Saturn conjunction, so you don't want to be in that for too long. Yeah.
Nope.
Uh yeah, there's a tendency to hold yourself to a really high standard that isn't sustainable.
Mhm.
So that could be what we're releasing as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is already, yeah, we're only halfway through the month and like there's so much that has already happened. Something else that feels important to mention before we move on to the second eclipse of the month is um March 22nd and March 23rd. We have the Venus Cazimi and the Mercury Cazimi. So really the time period is, we could say we're in the zone of both of those Kazimis from the 22nd into the 24th.
Mhm.
Those 3 days or so, Venus retrograde will be conjunct the sun, and Mercury retrograde will be conjunct the sun. And these are both our markers for the halfway points of both Venus and Mercury retrograde. We already talked a lot about Venus retrograde in Aries, and I think this could just be sort of a further development of that story with autonomy and reconnecting with the self and things like that. We haven't talked much about Mercury retrograde in Aries, though.
Yeah.
What is your feeling about Mercury retrograde in Aries kind of coming to a peak point around this time?
I think, especially it being, starting the day after the eclipse in Mercury's sign, Virgo. Mercury does rule Virgo. So when you think about it that way, the Kazemi to me is just almost it's a part of the eclipse story because it's in the middle of two eclipses, even the Venus one. And so with Mercury Kazemi on the 24th, which I think happens at 4 degrees, I want to say, that is, and they call it an audience with the king, right? Messages. And I think that's what I look forward to most about Kazimis is like there's this moment of realization. And so if, for instance, the eclipse didn't bring up anything for you, or you're just kind of unsure about something, I think that day will be a moment of clarity. Or maybe those 2 whole days, 22nd through 24th, will be moments of clarity with both retrogrades. So I think the other thing is it's a almost like a harbinger, and I don't mean that in the scary way people use harbinger, because it is right before the Aries eclipse, and it is a moment where we, I think, kind of distill everything from the last 18 months. There's a moment of like just understanding maybe what the last year and a half was about because the Aries eclipses are changing and this is the last Aries eclipse coming up. So the Mercury Cazimi gives you a chance to tune into what lessons did I learn? What happened? Is there any kind of last minute things I want to do here in this Aries place? And if you're not working with it in that kind of active conscious way, you'll still get those moments of clarity, I think. And another thing is on that same day, Mars is square Chiron on the 24th. Um, I think it's not exact, but it's at the same degree. It's 21 to 21, so it's pretty close to the exact square. And so there is maybe this moment of healing because Mars squared Chiron. This is the third time it'll do it during its retrograde. This moment of like, you know, getting to pay attention to yourself, to what you need, to the Aries stuff, autonomy, authenticity, and your mind tunes into that. So if there is anything that you've been working with in a healing way, I think the Kazimi here could also highlight that.
Oh, totally. Oh, I love that, bringing in that moment of clarity with the Kazimi, but then also there's clarity with our wounding.
Mhm.
And Mars squaring Chiron, that feels to me like wounding around how much I have to do, or my productivity, or how much I have to quote unquote accomplish in order to be valuable or whatever. And honestly, collectively, I see more and more of us challenging that pinnacle of capitalism, which is like you are your work, or your value is based on the amount of work and thus money you can produce. And I just see there being a bit of a collective reevaluation of that.
Oh yeah, with both the Venus and Mercury Cazimi kind of sandwiched right together. And Venus, I mean, traditionally rules money, other things, obviously, like relationships and love and what you value. And then Mercury ruling commerce in Aries, especially collectively with all the in America and probably globally, the talk about what the pandemic did with remote work and then how everyone's being forced to come back to the office. That could be a thing that happens around that time. It is the Mercury Cazimi is pretty well sextile to Pluto. Pluto is at 3 degrees Aquarius and the Cazimi is at 4. And the moon's even with Pluto that day in Aquarius. So there is a sense of taking back power and or just realizing the places that maybe you have been disempowered, because Pluto is disempowerment and empowerment. But in order to be empowered, you have to realize where you are disempowered or you can't empower yourself. So I
Oh,
think a
yeah.
lot of that first Pluto and Aquarius messaging is going to be around the disempowered places. And Aquarius is such a collective sign. So the fact that the Mercury Cazimi and Aries, our autonomy and our individuality is in an opportunistic sextile with Pluto, maybe the realizations are around, it's not just me that feels this way. It's everyone. And my individuality does fit into the collective. We're all individuals working together, and we have to work together. I think maybe that messaging is, guess what? It takes you individually to work together with other people.
Ah, yes. Oh, I love that. And you're making me think about how many federal employees have been fired in the last month and a half. And I'm thinking about how many individuals who worked for our government, and many of those individuals, if not the majority, were extremely passionate about their work and what they were doing and how they were helping the collective. And
Mm.
then to have these federal employees fired because of governmental cuts, it does feel, you're so right, like it would be easy for some of these people, let's say, to sink in to like a sort of like, oh, it's just me. But it's inarguably not just one person. It's so many people going through this same experience. And even if you didn't work for the government, just this idea that, corporate jobs treat workers kind of like a number, and that, at the end of the day, if those numbers aren't crunching, if the math isn't mathing, that person then could be at risk to just be let go. That's not right, And I don't think humans are our souls aren't meant to operate like that. We're all inherently valuable um beings, and we shouldn't be placed in this way that makes us think that we're just a number. And I'm talking like a Pisces now because I'm with another Pisces moon, but there is something like that coming through around this 22nd, 23rd, 24th, a sort of just collective heart space. I'm not alone. You're not alone. I value you no matter what your job status is. I don't care because I see you as a valuable member of society.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And to have Venus Cazimi is also sextile Pluto. It's at 2 degrees, and have those right next to each other. And sextiles, I love that aspect. They're 60 degrees away, and it is of the nature of Venus, I think. So it's really an opportunity, and I think realization probably comes in around this time. Not that people haven't had realizations. I mean, I have friends who have been remote and were hired remote before the pandemic who are being asked to come back into the office right now. And, all it really does take is a little organization between people to say, hey, no, no. And with Mars and Cancer, what do you really need? What does your family unit need? What do you need to feel good? And you're getting up at 6 to drive an hour into the office now because you moved 30 miles outside of your, office because you were remote, and now you're asked to be coming to work. And I think the inner needs, the needs, the rest. I mean, how long do you have to be a human at night after you get done working your 45 hours a week or whatever at the office? And I think that probably will hit a fever pitch around this time. I mean,
Mm.
eclipses anyway. The South Node in Virgo that we just had is about maybe not working so hard, like not giving it all away. And so to have these things boom, 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 I think you're likely to see maybe some class struggle, some power struggle like that. And there's more to come in March that also indicates that. But definitely around this time is going to be one of those moments where I think you'll see maybe protests, maybe maybe even protests in the way of refusal.
Yeah. Ooh, wait. And the sextile between Aquarius and Aries, like I think about the sextile. I'm like you, I love the sextile. And I think about it like how are these two signs at 60 degrees from each other kind of partners in crime a little bit? And Aries and Aquarius, how are they partners in crime? They do refuse. They're like, no, you cannot make me do something unless I want to. That's kind of what those two signs have in common. So there could be a kind of a collective. I've had enough. You cannot make me. Uh, go whatever. Beep, beep, beep,
Hmm.
or insert the.
You
Uh,
can't make me. I mean, it really is that, especially with the retrogrades. You have Mercury and Venus. Maybe the two planets that are willing to do it are like, I don't know.
Oh, it's so true. It's so true. And I think that leads us perfectly. We're already kind of talking about the themes of the eclipse, but our second eclipse on March 29th is the partial solar eclipse in Aries. And like you were saying, this is the final Aries eclipse. So it's one of those hybrid eclipses we have sort of at the beginning of a new nodal axis. And at the beginning of the year, the nodes moved into Pisces and Virgo. But because this lunar eclipse happens at 9 degrees Aries, it's still close enough to that north node in Pisces by degree to be counted as a partial eclipse. And Mandi, you were mentioning this is a good time to think about what have I learned with Aries throughout the past 18 months? What has happened with my Aries section of my chart? What has been released? What has been learned? Those Aries lessons aren't over, but I want to think that we're wiser now in that Aries house where now we can handle the Venus retrograde in Aries, the Mercury retrograde in Aries, then Neptune will move into Aries. I'm thinking we're handling Aries topics on more of a, we're evolving. We're evolving how we're handling Aries topics.
Oh, yeah, that's a great way to put it. And because the Aries eclipses, for 18 months, they've been around. And you know, a lot, it's so funny how the nodes move backwards through the zodiac. The North Node moves backwards. So, you know, being an Aries, which is motivation, individuality, um, sometimes frustration is Aries, but you know, it's like the I'm gonna do it. But it's so funny that I feel like we didn't know exactly what we wanted to do. I felt like, at least personally, like, okay, I do need to do something, but I don't know what to do. And it's like now I think with the North Node in Pisces, this one may be a moment where uh we have the energy now to do it, whatever that thing is in your life. You know, it may be getting a credit card, or it may be applying for a new job or starting something new, but you're maybe don't have the full vision yet, like you haven't imagined it. But this eclipse with the North Node in Pisces is like, also here's the inspiration. You've had the push, you know, you wanted to do something. What is it? And now we have the North Node in Pisces, and have those both, that hybrid. You know, I think a lot of people will have ideas around this time. It's almost like being able to see up to the muses, you know, while you have Pisces stuff, and Venus has retrograded back into Pisces at this time. So yeah, that's kind of how I'm viewing this, is like, all right, but what am I going to do? Now you get
Yes.
the notion, you know.
Oh, totally, totally. And you just reminded me too, like the whole like, well, what do I do? What am I gonna do? You know, one of my favorite Aries charts, or Aryan chart, I should say, is Bernie Sanders, who has that moon Mars conjunction in Aries. And funny enough, I'm looking at his chart right now. I will pop it up on the screen on YouTube. He has South Node in Pisces and North Node in Virgo, and that North Node is conjunct Neptune in Virgo.
Oh wow.
So he's going through this nodal reversal, but also he's in his Neptune opposition, and he has this double Aries placement. In a way, he's a good embodiment, person wise, of maybe what the astrology is saying, and something that rings true for him as a politician and just a person in general. He always knows what to do. He's always telling you what to do, even when things get rough and nobody knows, has lost energy, or no one knows what to do. He's there with directions. So I think there are maybe quite literally more directions coming from him, but also, you know, just symbolically, there's more people taking the lead. We need that sacred leadership archetype, I think, in our society. We need to recognize when, you know, someone is that leader. And I don't think everybody is necessarily a leader, but I think everybody has intuition to follow which leader aligns with my divine self and which leader aligns with my childhood wounds.
Mm.
That's something that's really coming up, I think, for me at least. So, yeah, those are that Bernie just came to my mind as you were talking.
Yeah, and it's such a great, it makes me think about what you said about you feel like the Aries is evolving, and I totally feel that way, because the new moon in Aries is answering to Mars in Cancer. And lo and behold, it's still square Chiron. They both move to the 22nd degree together. And there is this, you know, if Aries takes notes or direction from Mars, Mars has just been beat the hell up. You know, like Mars is whiny and tired, and, you know, just like trying to get started again. It's almost like after you have the flu or something and you feel like, I gotta get started again, you know, and it takes you a little bit. That's Mars at this moment. And you have this new moon, it's a partial solar eclipse. But the other thing is, you've got all this stuff in Pisces, Neptune, Venus, the North Node, Saturn at this moment, and that changes the day after. But at this moment, everything's in Pisces. Pisces and Cancer are very intuitive, very tuned into needs and to love and to compassion and to nurturing. Aries, this solar eclipse is like, you know, I've got, you mean in order to make the do what I need to do for myself. I have to take care of people, or I have to take care of myself. What are you talking about?
Right, right.
But it is that the nature of this eclipse is like, hey, Aries, like, and I'm not talking to Aries people in general. Everyone's got Aries somewhere. Wherever you do, it's like, make sure you're doing it with those foundational watery things, with emotion, with love and compassion. And I think that's something that keeps coming up for me with this eclipse is how very little Aries it is,
Oh,
even though it's totally Aries, it's very not Aries.
it's not, it's so much more watery. And you're making me think about how Pisces and Aries are not in a traditional aspect with each other. So you could say, I think it's a semi-sextile in modern astrology, but like Hellenistic wise, we wouldn't necessarily consider that an aspect. And something we could say is Aries and Pisces can't see each other. And even think about looking at something that's out of your peripheral vision. You have to like crank your neck in an uncomfortable way to look at it. That's how Aries and Pisces feel about looking at each other sometimes. But in this eclipse, Aries is forced to crank its neck and look at Pisces. And also, Aries can see Cancer, but
Mm.
it's an uncomfortable mirror being held because it's a square to Mars in Cancer. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like I'd rather look at Pisces and Cancer. Aries is thinking that, because Mercury is really, it's like the next day also go, or maybe that evening goes back into Pisces. And so it's just really everything's trying to get back to Pisces for a second, And one other thing that I noticed is that for 6 months, I think it's 6 of them, every new moon, this is the last one, has been at 9 degrees, which is very
Mhm.
odd to me. I'm just like, huh, all first decan new moons for 6 months. Um, yeah, I know. I'm like, it's weird. So yeah, one February was 9 degrees of Pisces, January was 9 degrees of Aquarius, December 9 degrees of Capricorn.
Oh my God.
Uh-huh. And December, because there were two in December, 9 degrees of Sag, 9 degrees of Scorpio, and I think that was, yeah, it was Libra that was 10. So from Scorpio till now, we've had all 9 degree new moons. Um, and there's something about not making it past that first decan to me. Like there no new moons have been past that first decan. Um, or even earlier, like it just hasn't happened. So I think this being the last one, it'll be at 7 for Taurus. And yet you're still not out of that first decan, but there's something about 9 being the number of gestation, and almost completion.
Yeah.
And I think that this solar eclipse is really almost like a completion eclipse. There's also Saturn is sextile Uranus at this time. Again, not
Mhm.
exact, but I don't think they exactly sextile till Aries Gemini, but I mean that's pretty close. And Saturn and Mars is trine Saturn. There's this kind of mini grand trine happening between Mars, Saturn, and Uranus during this eclipse. And it's almost like change is imminent. You're done with that.
Oh, yes.
So I think that's what this eclipse really feels like the most to me.
I love that you brought that up. And I'm even looking to beyond all of these new moons being at 9, Mercury stationed retrograde at 9
Yep.
Aries, and then Venus stationed retrograde at 10 Aries. I'm a life path 9. So yeah, 9 is very much completion, wrapping up the cycle. And because my lucky me, my midheaven is at 9 degrees Aries, so I'll have the eclipse right on my midheaven at the
Mine's 10.
Okay, yes, that's I was thinking we have the same midheaven. And uh I know the Sabian symbol for 9 Aries is a crystal gazer or a psychic gazing into a crystal ball. And I think that is funny that we're both, astrologers and we have our midheaven at that kind of degree. But I'm wondering, yeah, maybe we should, if you're into the Sabian symbols as an astrology student, look into the Sabian symbols of this eclipse because it seems kind of interesting.
Yeah, and it describes so well the fact that all the Pisces is there, and even the Mars and Cancer, because the water is so intuitive and so emotional and so empathetic and magical, really. And so to have an Aries Sabian symbol and this eclipse happened there, and it also describe what's going on in the stars right this moment is pretty cool. I mean, I'll always find the Sabian symbols hit right on whatever theme needs to be shown at that moment. And I do think there is a sense that we have to think outside the box a little bit. And I think that's what Saturn sextile Uranus is, Mars sextile Uranus at this moment. It's like, the answers are not there. We have to write a new book,
Oh,
like this is
yes.
not working. Nothing is working. And I feel that way about my life. Like I need to, it's time to write a new chapter. We're done with all that. And I think that is a really good way to look at it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I can't even tell you how much comfort it brings me that you will also have this eclipse on your midheaven. Cause I'm like, I was kind of freaking out for a second. I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna, what's gonna happen? So I'm glad that I'll have you to call. And I guess that kind of leads us into our final
Dun,
transit.
dun, dun.
Dun dun dun. This is our first outer planet ingress of the year. Although I'm kind of counting Pluto too. So if you don't know, everybody and their brother is moving signs this year in the outer planet world. Pluto moved into Aquarius. Neptune on March 30th will move into Aries. And then later this summer, Saturn, Jupiter, and Uranus will all move into new signs as well. So we're like 2 out of 5 now by the end of the month. Pluto has moved into Aquarius, and now Neptune is moving into Aries. I know historically, well, one thing we should preface for the really baby astrology students is Neptune takes a really long time to transit through a sign.
166 years.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a much bigger
Oh,
cycle.
well, that's the whole orbit. Sorry. But yeah,
Oh, that's
through a
okay.
sign.
That's okay. But yeah, through the sign, it's maybe 20-ish, 20
Yeah,
to
it was
30-ish years.
2012 was when it moved into Pisces, I want to say.
Okay, so maybe even a little bit shorter than that. And last time Neptune was in Pisces was or sorry, last time Neptune was moving from Pisces to Aries was during the Civil War 1861. But there's some other important dates that we could look into. If I know it's a complex question, Mandi, but I trust you. What would you say, like historically, archetypally, what comes up? Have you noticed? You're much more of a historian than I am astrologically. Yeah, archetypally, what comes up in history? What have we seen when Neptune moves from Pisces to Aries?
Yeah, it's ideology shifts, I think, is probably the best way. And you could hook that to religion, because there has been a lot of historically religious things that have happened in the 1530s. It was the Protestant Reformation. And also Henry VIII broke from the Catholic Church at that time. Um, I think there's definitely some ideological things associated with the Civil War. And then you also have class. I mean, ideology is probably the overarching umbrella. But then underneath that, it's class and power struggles, it's war, and it's, I think, social upheaval is a good way to say that. And that's probably due to the ideological shifts or realizations. And I think Neptune being such a um, well, I mean, it's abstract. It's the most abstract archetype we have in astrology, and for a reason. You're not really supposed to understand Neptune, but Neptune, I guess, if you can pin it down, is your spirituality. It is I kind of liken it. I love symbolism. It's easy for me to draw on Christianity because I grew up and I live in the South. I live in Alabama. So I have Christian symbolism around me everywhere. But the Holy Spirit, if you look at the symbolism, it's just something that whispers to you. It's not the Bible, it's not the preacher. It is something you get. That's what the Holy Spirit is in Christianity. And there's, through all religions, plenty of that symbolism. And it's the messaging you get, right? The spiritual kind of especially in Aries, it's moving into Aries, right? It's the spiritual oomph that you get, the need to do something about it, I think. I think some problematic things are definitely slavery. There was in 1690, or in the 1600s, 1697, I want to say, is when Neptune moved into Aries. There was 1530, 1697, and 1861. So there was expansion of slavery during that time. And then you get to the 1861 and it was, hey, this is not really right. And actually, if you really tune into it, the expansion of slavery was even more so right before the Civil War. That's what happened, is that it was unmitigated expansion. So if you look at what happens with Aries, it's realizations, I think. Realizations that there may be things out of balance. And it's not power like Pluto is. Neptune is like more that inner messaging you get. And when collectively you get inner messaging, you're going to get people who get the opposite inner messaging, or maybe who aren't paying attention, and just keep going with that one thing. But Neptune and Aries to me is very Joan of Arc. I don't know. I don't know what, Joan of Arc had going on in her astrology chart, but I feel like it's very that much of this need to do something about a spiritual concept. And then also almost like redrawing of boundaries, the power struggles there. Aries is associated with war, no matter how you look at it. And Neptune is so much of the delusion. So you can have delusions of power, right? So you'll have people in the world collectively that you'll see that represent Neptune and Aries in a very real way. And then you'll have that subset of people who are like, no, not going to put up with it. And Aries and Aquarius, like we said, are sextile. Neptune and Pluto are eventually going to click into a sextile. They already sort of are by sign, and they're pretty close. I think a lot of astrologers don't give it that big of an orb, but I will go ahead and say when Neptune moves into Aries that it is definitely clicking in with Pluto and Aquarius. And so I think even more so, we have that power struggle, class, and boundaries. Boundaries were redrawn. And I think that's also a Saturn thing. And that's something to note, is that later on, Saturn will move into Aries with Neptune. And so what do we have? We already have the president talking about annexing Canada. So, I mean, those conversations already happening. And a lot of times on the buildup, you'll have that kind of come in before the actual thing. But just to note, in 1861, the first shots of the Civil War were fired April 12th, and April 13th is when Neptune moved into Aries. Now, does that mean I think there will be a Civil War? No. If it does happen, it will look way different. Things are so different, so this isn't, I don't want to fearmonger and scare, because history doesn't really repeat, but it does rhyme. And so I do think that there is likely to be struggle. I don't think it's going to be super easy, but I do think it's going to look very different. And I do think that Pluto is on our side.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? I'm so glad you said that, because anytime in the past like 2 months, I've felt despair over the state of the world and the political climate, blah, blah, blah. I have taken a lot of solace in Pluto being in Aquarius. And I've been like, you know what? We're already seeing it. And we will continue to see how collective strength can repower itself. And I think when you're talking about Neptune and ideology, and even thinking about the Civil War as a war about ideology. I mean, well, what war isn't? But especially that one. It was more about ideology versus like gaining land or whatever. Um, I'm thinking about, again, Aries, the phrasing "I am," and Neptune, delusion. So there's like this delusion of I am that we see a lot from our political leaders. Even let's go back to 15 whatever it was, 1530s, Henry VIII, during Neptune and Aries, talk about delusion of I am, I'm gonna this religion doesn't work for me because I can't do what I want to do. So I'm going to change things for everybody and order everybody to, do what I'm doing.
It's funny you said that, because that was the last time it was so similar. Pluto was in Aquarius at the very early. It was the same sextile. That was the only one during the 1600s when Pluto was in Leo, and during the 1860s when Pluto was in Taurus. So we've had Pluto in fixed signs every time Neptune is ingressed, but not always Aquarius. So the 1530s one was, I mean, I think it is that you have the idea of king, I mean, Aquarius is the leader. Aquarius is the bird's eye view, right? So you will have this idea of kings and queens, I think, coming up, and maybe we should watch that in, what's going on in England. I don't know. They still have a king and queen, but but there's also the fact that it was Martin Luther's Protestant Reformation. And I think that's something to note, because people did stand up against something that was so brutal, right? The Catholic Church was pretty brutal, and they were grifters back then. I'm not going to comment on it any further about now, but I'm just going to say that at that point they were like selling fake relics from the church and things like that, and Martin Luther had this, idea, the 95 Theses. So I think there's a lot of things from the 1530s. It seems like so long ago, but I mean, the Charles the Fifth was the last Pope crowned emperor at that time. And I mean, if you think about things like that, religious conflicts, but also colonization was starting around that time, colonial expansion. It was the Renaissance. So, I mean, I guess we can, yay, Renaissance, that's pretty nice. But I mean, I think you can look for power shifts being a big thing. And in a way that can kind of be a little scary, but I think the power is in the people's hands. I mean, I think that is really well established from the fact that the Protestant Reformation happened, So I think that we have a lot of power as people, and that is going to be the theme. Whereas we will also have people trying to take power. But I mean, that's really what invites people to say, no, it's the collective that has the power.
Right. Well, and I can't help but think that we're mentioning like these greater sort of foundations or structures of religion. And I'm thinking that something that's been popping up on the news end of this month is our current the Catholic Church current Pope Francis is it kind of not doing well. I mean, it's possible that he could pass on to the other side fairly soon. And thinking about him as a pope, he's been very Aryan in a lot of ways. I know he's technically a Sagittarius, but he was like the first pope from South America. He was born in Buenos Aires. He was the first pope to kind of say things like same-sex couples can have a blessing from the church, and he's approved like civil unions between same-sex people. Has said a lot of things about ceasefire in Gaza. You know, he's kind of been this sort of really a pope that's expressed a lot of humility and has turned away from kind of this royalty that I think a lot of the, you know, if you've ever been to the Vatican in Rome, you know it's the monarchy of Rome. Essentially, it's the castle, and there's a lot of corruption in the Catholic Church. Pope Francis even apologized for a lot of the sexual assaults that happened in the Catholic Church over the past couple of years. Not that that really, you know, not that that contradicts the suffering, but I mean,
Sure.
he's the first one to even acknowledge it, really, right? So that being said, I'm thinking, I'm like, what if this guy dies and some Donald Trump Pope comes back in and like kind of does something like, all right, we're taking everything that Pope Francis did and we're going back to the tradition. And then that would be very Neptune and Aries. And then it makes the people mad because there's this
Mm.
sense of we were making progress and now we're going backwards. Uh,
Yeah.
so just a light prediction. I don't know what's, I mean, I'm just keeping an eye on things as, you know, as an Italian.
Yeah. And as an Italian, you are, right? You're trying to move there, I think, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, the thing is too, and I don't want to misspeak, that Martin Luther, it was early 1500s that he nailed his 95 Theses to the door. But what's funny is there was he didn't die till like 1546. It was definitely after Neptune ingress to Aries, and um he was the one who started it. But what's funny is Henry VIII during Neptune and Aries made it work for him. Like it really didn't. He was a Catholic up until he needed to get out of a marriage. And then, so I can see how just something that with Neptune and Pisces started so purely, and then Neptune ingress Aries, and someone's taking that. And although it did expand the Protestant Reformation, I mean, the Church of England, break from Catholic Church, whatever, it was because it worked for a leader.
Yes, yes.
So I
Boy.
totally see what you're saying. I mean, and you never know. Like whatever happens, there are going to be people who take advantage of it. I mean, I think it's one of these things that's really exciting to see, but it's also kind of a little nail biting. You don't want another civil war to happen, and there's never been rhetoric about that like there has been lately.
Oh,
And to
yeah.
see the rhetoric coming up at a similar kind of time astrologically, it is a little disconcerting.
Yeah.
But I think what you do is you make sure you know what you believe, and you dive into that very, very, I, I guess, deeply. And then also, if Neptune dissolves and Aries is about individuality, there is a sense that, yes, you are you, a very you person, you're an individual, you're autonomous, but we can't make it without each other. And I think that may be another realization that we have. It's not so much dissolving the individuality as much as it is dissolving the boundaries, the disconnection. So maybe, I mean, we all have been very disconnected um with social media, and you could look at Neptune and Pisces. It's completely dissolved that compassion in people. Everyone just gets online and just cancel culture happen, and it's like it's
Yeah.
hopefully that will be a good thing that happens with Neptune and Aries, is because you can stay disconnected and be overrun, or you can reconnect and see that your individuality is only as good as being witnessed by somebody, you know?
Oh,
Otherwise, what is it
true.
to be an individual and to be alone? So I hope that that is more of what is the dissolution part of it, is dissolving the boundaries between us, you know?
Yes. Oh, I'm glad you said that. Yeah. Um, wow. Yeah, this is it's a big month and it's a lot to chew on, a lot to think about. And yeah, keep in mind that Neptune will officially move into Aries January 2026. So 2025, he's kind of still back and forth between Aries and Pisces, but it's not until top of 2026 he moves into Aries for good, or at least until March 2039. So
Yeah.
this is like, this we'll be living with this theme until 2039. And don't you love astrologers? We
Oh,
just
yes.
we love our cycles. And yeah, just notice things. I think that's really the advice when it comes to this month, like especially with our Aries and Pisces house. Notice what things are coming up and what is required, what kind of faith is required of you to keep going.
Yeah, you get one more chance in October, from October through like January, to dip back into Neptune and Pisces, and then it's over. So notice the differences this starting now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough for going through the whole thing with me, Mandy. I couldn't have done the history stuff without you. And maybe once Jupiter goes into Cancer, maybe we'll do like a historical Jupiter in Cancer episode or something if you're up for it this summer.
Hmm.
But besides that, I think a lot of my followers already know you from past podcasts you've been on. But if you don't follow Mandi Rae on Instagram or YouTube, I'll have all of her stuff in the show notes. It's all under Ecstatic Astrology. And your website is also ecstaticastrology.com, right, Mandy?
Yep.
Okay.
Ecstasy means to stand outside of oneself. And I feel like astrology helps.
I love that. I love that. And Mandy's also an excellent astrocartographer and is really good at helping people with location stuff too. So, is that still an offering you have, Mandy?
Yeah,
Astrocartography?
I pretty much offer everything. I've never stopped studying. So secondary progression, solar returns, astrocartography, I do it all.
Yes. Yes. We are both Pisces moons in the ninth house. So, we're the jack of all trades.
Uh-huh.
All right, Mandy. Thank you so much. And we'll catch you next time on the next episode, whenever that may be.
Thank you.